Based on the conversations I've read around Marvel Midnight Suns, there's a bunch of misconceptions about what the game is actually going to be. I know I heard Marvel XCOM and was slightly confused. I imagined myself sending waves of Stark Tech equipped super soldiers against some kind of extra dimensional invasion. That's not what Marvel Midnight Suns is going to be, and luckily for all of us today, I can finally clear up these misconceptions. I was flown out to Firaxis HQ by 2K, and I'm here to give you the breakdown of what I learned by playing the game. There will be a follow-up video where I talk about my visit to Firaxis specifically, so keep an eye out for that. Now, I understand that some of you will be disappointed to hear that Midnight Suns is not like an XCOM game, but please stick with me, because while it isn't an XCOM game, it is worth looking into, at least based on my first impression. Trying to give you an elevator pitch of the game, like I would for another game, is actually quite difficult. For example, I would describe the game Peglin as Slay the Spire meets Peggle, and you would immediately have an understanding of what that game is, provided you know what both Slay the Spire and Peggle are. Marvel Midnight Suns, on the other hand, is a really large game with a lot of moving parts, and so I'm going to have to break it up into various phases to describe it to you. There are two main phases of the game, the battle phase and the home base phase. The battle phase of the game is where you take control of various Marvel superheroes in either standalone missions or a series of interconnected missions. This part of the game is a little bit like Slay the Spire meets Into the Breach. Just like in Slay the Spire, you're going to be drawing cards every single turn, which is going to dictate what tools you have available to you to solve the battlefield puzzle that has been presented to you. When a lot of people heard about the game using card mechanics, they were thinking about games like Hearthstone, with microtransactions and heavily monetized deck building. In the build that I played, I didn't see any evidence of anything like that. And I think you would be better off if you thought of the card mechanics as simply a way to generate RNG in the game. Instead of commanding your individual soldiers like you would in XCOM, you take all of their abilities and you put them in a bag and you take out a different move every turn. In XCOM, a soldier can only do one action per turn, but in Midnight Suns, if you draw 3 attack cards for the same hero, they can attack 3 times in one turn. Your action economy will be similar to XCOM, but the actual execution of playing those cards is a lot more like Into the Breach, because positioning your heroes and knocking enemies into environmental hazards in an efficient way is the second half of that battle gameplay loop. Enemies telegraph their attacks, and so you can use careful manipulation of the battlefield environment and positioning to set up for a massive combo. You can knock enemies into each other or each other's attacks, for example. However, because of the card game mechanic, you're never going to have all of the tools available to you because your heroes draw what moves they can do from the ability deck. You often also have secondary objectives to complete on top of this, such as retrieving an important item that has been stolen from the Sanctum Sanctorum, or simply preventing civilians being wounded by your enemies. Just like Into the Breach, every turn enemies will reinforce onto the battlefield as well. So there's always a mounting pressure to achieve your objective and clear out all of the enemies. If you want to see me do a deep dive on the combat mechanics specifically, keep an eye out for a video in the next few days where I'll talk you through some of the battles I played. There are echoes of XCOM in the combat, but due to the nature of the setting and narrative, when you play it, it feels like a very different game. In this way, people familiar with XCOM will probably be better off thinking as if they were playing the game from the perspective of the Chosen from XCOM War of the Chosen, where they're going up against hordes of rookie XCOM soldiers instead of the other way around. Which to me makes more sense because you're going to be in control of superheroes like Spider-Man, Blade, Captain Marvel, Ghost Rider, and an all-new fully customizable Marvel hero known as the Hunter. It wouldn't really make sense in my mind for superheroes to be significantly threatened by a single Hydra goon, but a squad of them can dish out some punishment. Speaking of fully customizable, most of the heroes in the game can be equipped with new armor and abilities and by changing their card loadouts. In the build I played, heroes could each bring 8 cards to a battle, and these cards all had varying effects and abilities. The quick ability on a card would let you play another card if you'd knocked out an enemy using the card with the quick ability. Knockback will let you bump enemies into each other or the environment, and Ghost Rider could create a portal to hell, which if you knocked an enemy into, gave you a percentage chance to instantaneously kill them. There were other abilities like being able to taunt people into attacking you, debuffing your enemies, or even buffing your allies. When it came to customization though, the Hunter was very much so the most customizable of all of the heroes. You could customize basically everything about them, from their outward appearance to their heroic abilities and their morality when you're interacting with the RPG part of the game. Because there's a second half of this game outside of the battle system that has a lot to offer. If the battle portion of the game is like Slay the Spire beats Into the Breach, the home-based portion of the game is an RPG game like Dragon Age or Elder Scrolls, combined with the home-based mechanics of an XCOM game set in a supernatural Marvel universe. People who've played XCOM will find familiar progression mechanics, like researching technology, upgrading character abilities, and a mission table where you can choose your next move in the campaign against Hydra and Lilith. Lilith is the big bad evil guy of the story, who just so happens to be your mother. Now you'll also find a lot of secrets to explore in the home base, which is played from a third-person RPG perspective. You'll also find plenty of opportunities to interact with the heroes that you'll recruit over the course of the game. You can build friendships with them, you can train them up to receive buffs in battle, and you can outfit them with powerful new equipment. Most of the stuff you can do in the home base with regard to the RPG mechanics is optional, so if you're just looking for a hardcore turn-based tactics game with an XCOM-style meta-progression system, you can find that here very easily. You can crank that difficulty setting very high, and while I was only allowed to play on normal, I can see how this game would become quite challenging once you go past the first few notches on the difficulty slider. There's definitely a lot here to sink your teeth into when it comes to tactical combat. In general, there's just an awful lot to unpack here, and even though I only spent 5 hours with the game, I only barely scratched the surface when it came to the RPG and home-based mechanics. If you're interested in a deep dive on the home-based mechanics, there will be a video where I cover that in detail. If I'm going to be totally honest with you, the game took me by total surprise. I was extremely skeptical when I had heard about it, but now that I've played it, I'm quite interested in seeing what the game has to offer on release. I was genuinely kind of expecting the game to just not work. Like I was expecting like the ideas behind it to not mesh very well. And I was expecting to kind of bounce off of the game. But there is actually a really interesting game here, and I think a lot of people are going to enjoy it. I really liked the battle manipulation you could do and the combos you could pull off between the different hero abilities. I'm also really excited to be able to play Blade in a game, considering I don't think he's actually been in a game for decades. I'm a big fan of XCOM, and I wasn't sure how they were going to make a Marvel quote-unquote XCOM game work, but having played it, I think they got pretty close to the mark. Even if I don't really think it's an XCOM style game anymore, but something else entirely, if I were to make a recommendation, I would cautiously and optimistically recommend that fans of the XCOM genre at least keep an eye on it. And if you're a big fan of RPG games, or even roguelikes like Into the Breach and Slay the Spire, then definitely pay attention. Weirdly enough, I think people who like Dragon Age Origins and are into Marvel are going to like this game. But like speaking of Marvel, I was also a little bit cautious about this game because a couple of the recent Marvel games have kind of missed the mark, which is probably a little bit of an understatement based on community sentiment. And in my mind, when I heard about this game, it sounded like it would be a really hard sell. But now that I've had a taste of actually playing it, I really want to play more. And I think anyone who's a big fan of the Marvel Universe and likes tactical combat games, they will find this to be a must-buy, provided that the quality of what I was shown keeps up throughout the game. You do have to keep in mind, I was only shown a very, very thin horizontal slice of the game. I wasn't able to really get in depth with the mechanics. So there's a lot of things about the game that I'm not even still sure about, even though I've touched almost every single mechanic of the game. For example, it could be that one of the progression systems in the game just kind of becomes tedious towards the mid and end game. But I'm not going to be able to tell you that right now because I only played about 5 hours. But I'll go into my feelings and first impression of the game in another video. I wanted to keep this video as informative about what the game is from a high level as much as possible, right? And hopefully you come away with a better idea of what the game actually is from a conceptual level, like this high level. It's not Marvel XCOM. It's kind of like more like Into the Breach, Slay the Spire meets like Dragon Age Origins and XCOM. It's kind of like a little bit more of a different mishmash. But like to summarize this video, no, it's not an XCOM game, but if you like XCOM games, you might like it, and it's worth paying attention to and seeing how the final months of development pan out, as there is a game with huge potential here. But that's it for me. I love you all very much, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.